Matty Lansdown. Welcome to Roll with the Punches.
Thanks for having me, Tiffany. I'm excited to have a bit of a deep dive on whatever we talk about today.
You know what? I always have a stringent plan. Do you know what I plan?
Roll with the punches.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing. I plan on rocking up, and that's as far as my diligent planning evolves.
I like it. Let's
So
wing it.
welcome to the chaos that is rolling with the punches.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for letting me jump on the show.
Oh, you were referred to me by a mutual friend of ours, Steve. Shout out to Steve.
Thanks,
It was
Steve.
Steve, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I might better get that right. Say the wrong person, I'll get in trouble.
Steve, the marketing man.
Yeah, what a legend. Hey, he's actually been a great source of kind of information and inspiration at times, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I found the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, how do you know Steve?
Through another mutual friend in sort of the health and wellness space that connected me with him, talking about branding and marketing sort of stuff. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. Thanks for coming along for the ride, listeners, on our irrelevant banter here. You're interesting though. You've got a podcast, and it is called, and I love the sound of it, and I think my listeners are going to be pretty into it. It's called "How to Not Get Sick and Die."
Straight to the point.
Yeah, no mucking around there, is there?
It does what it says on the box.
Yeah, I feel like a few people would be kind of into read that and go, "Oh yeah, I might have a listen."
Yeah, it's been going for a couple of years now, since January 2019. Just interview lots of different health and wellness experts, and I do a lot of solo episodes as well. The basic principle is that I worked in Western medicine in cancer research for 7 years after becoming a scientist, and I've worked in multiple different fields, including vaccine formulation, nutrition, etc., etc. And I got to the point where I realized that essentially modern medicine isn't really helping many people, and so that's what led me to create the podcast and sort of become a nutritionist, create my little business, and help people in a sort of more holistic way.
I already feel like an hour's not enough. I already feel like I want to go everywhere with you on this.
Let's go everywhere.
What made you go, I want to be a scientist for a start? You obviously didn't get banned from your science class for playing with Bunsen burners in year 9.
Well, that's not true. I was suspended several times in high school, and I was a bit of a... Because I'm actually from quite a heavy boxing family myself.
Yes!
So my uncle is a Masters champion, and my cousins all fought, and so I did too, only on an amateur level, and this is like 20 years ago now. But yeah, so when it came to high school, I was always this cheeky bastard that was just not scared of anyone and just loved stirring the pot. So yeah, I got in quite a bit of trouble growing up. But when it came to high school and year 12, like this podcast, I just winged it. I just didn't study, and then I got into university and just thought, oh shit, I guess I should move to the city and do this uni thing.
Do you know what? Sometimes I think, and I only think this since starting the podcast and talking to some pretty elite humans like yourself, sometimes I think it's those personality types, it's those that will go against the grain, are the ones that when we finally find the thing, we burrow down so deep and we just don't accept what might be seen as the answer or the facts right now. So it's those people that go, nah, there's going to be another way. I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because if you just accept whatever you're told, like you sort of, I don't know, there's just no point to existing if you're just going to be a robot for the rest of your life and just be like, oh, okay, no worries. Like, even if you feel, and a lot of those people feel differently about stuff, but they never do anything about it. And so then, what are you doing? You're living a lie?
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait to get into like the balance between science and a bit of woo-woo with you. I feel like there's going to be a bit of everything. Oh.
There's going to be the whole shebang.
So you worked in cancer research?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was cool. So I ended up there unexpectedly. I just experienced a redundancy, and it was really just the next job. So I didn't really go into working into a cancer hospital with any kind of ego about being a famous cancer scientist or anything like that. And pretty rapidly upon sort of starting there, I realized that of all these meetings that I had been to, and I used to go every single Monday to what's called a morbidity and mortality conference or meeting.
Well, that sounds fun.
Life of the party. No, but basically the whole point of that meeting is it's like a death audit. And so you sort of review what happened, what went wrong, etc., etc. And I just, after my first 6 months, I kind of was like, I've been to a lot of these meetings now, and nobody's ever talked about the cause of the cancer and what actually led to the cancer happening in the first place.
Wow.
It was always conversations around which therapies was essentially the therapy that killed them. And so I was kind of like, this doesn't make sense. I've never been in a meeting or a part of a research project or read a paper even where they talk about the cause of cancer and how we should fix that. And so that's the beginning. So my mum's a nurse. I grew up in the sticks in country Victoria. So I kind of thought medicine and science was like the most amazing thing that, humans had ever created with their brains. And I was fully, into it at this point. But at that point, I was kind of like, this just doesn't kind of add up. It just doesn't feel right. And that began my own personal research journey into the history of Western medicine, the history of the pharmaceutical companies. And this was well before 2020 brought this stuff to people's, vision, right into front of them, really. So I went on this path and learnt about the Rockefeller family, which essentially started the first pharmaceutical business in the late 1800s as byproducts from oil production. And they just wanted to make money out of the byproducts for their oil production. And in that process, because the Rockefeller family was essentially the first billionaire family on the planet, like ever, from monopolizing the oil and rail industry, they had control of the resources, much of the world's resources. And so from there, what they did is they infiltrated the universities of the world with their money and said, look, do this new thing called science. And this is only 150 years ago, and we'll give you a heap of cash, which is $100,000 to a uni in 1880 is like crazy money, right? So, wow. But all you have to do is put one of our guys on your board. And they slowly did that over a 50-year period, sort of from about 1880 to sort of 1928, where they just let these guys slowly infiltrate all of the education bodies in the world. And in that process, they also started criminalizing some alternative therapies that had been around for thousands of years. And so I learnt all of this, and I sort of, went up the chain of the last 100 years and then sort of got to where I am today. And I was like, holy shit, this is messed up. This is all about business, money, making sure people can keep coming back. Like, we keep you alive long enough as long as you can keep coming back to buy the medicine.
Do you know what's interesting? This morning, it's probably not interesting. Oh, well, it is to me. This morning I was doing a podcast with Harps, and the topic I chose and wanted to unpack was what results in us and what influenced us to think and believe and choose and do and be who we are today. And as you're saying that, I was just like thinking of the evolution of how they just slowly changed what people believed and controlled that. Like the environment, they just took these people and they seeded them in, and then that changes the environment, and essentially that changes humanity. I'm getting fired up, Matty.
And when you think about it, like, if it's... Yeah, I get super fired up on this topic. But when you think about human psychology, like, we get excited about new ideas and new things. And back then, you can't just Google it. The only information sources are the guys at the pub or at work, or your friends or the newspaper. And this was, potentially even before radio existed. So you were limited resources. So when somebody comes along and says, there's a new thing, everyone's like, oh my God, there's a new thing. How exciting. Whereas, in the day of Instagram, and like, we see new things 1,000 times a day, and we can't Google it to see if it's legit or not legit. So you can understand the excitement of people back then being like, wow, there's this revolution in the way that we do medicine and healthcare. And so I totally understand how humans got onto the idea as an opportunity. Plus, thinking of the businesses like the universities and educational institutions were like, sweet, we got $100,000. This is like, loads of money to make sure this business keeps moving forward and we can keep educating the masses. And so it makes sense. I think one thing that we forget, though, is that I don't think many people can think beyond their grandparents' sort of age. And these things have been being built, like the patriarchy and stuff like that, for thousands of years. And every sort of leader is part of a long plan of generations and generations of leaders. And so most people are like, oh, that didn't happen, like, or no, it hasn't been a plan for 10,000 years, or whatever number. But I think most people can't really make their frame of reference bigger than grandpa's age.
Yeah. Far out. Tell me more. Tell me some more things that are going to shock me about what you learned when you dug into that very big, very deep hole that is the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, so many things. And I mean, the scary thing is that I also came across a large cohort of doctors and scientists and nurses that had either been threatened, that had either gone missing. There's a long list of cancer people that have suspiciously gone missing in the 60s, 70s, 80s, because a lot of people that were kind of like you were saying in the beginning, these people that go against the grain, saw it for what it was. And I'm actually reading a book at the minute where they interview a group of elderly women in Africa. I forget which country. But they talk about when they first saw Western medicine coming in, and this group of women were protesting against hospitals being built because they were like, this will destroy the babies, essentially, the genetic strength of our humans that we produce by introducing a medical solution. So there's a lot of people throughout history that have intuitively known that you can't beat nature, like you can't do that. And so this group of women obviously got told to piss off because, capitalism's more important and we can get into the African countries and make a buck over there as well. And it's easy to do clinical trials in poor nations because we can incentivize them by giving them food or giving them money that they've never, don't have access to. So yeah, there's lots of people throughout history that have been against it from day one, have seen it for what it is. And this is not to say that it doesn't have its place. I think the issue is that in modern day, it probably needs 10% of the pie, and it's got about 97% of the pie.
You make a really good point about that birthing and what that's doing for the generations ahead. But I remember at some point, and I'll screw this up because I don't know really, but I remember hearing that how what are they called, cesareans will result in a weaker immune system because that process of birthing through the birth canal and that squeezing of the baby's body through, whatever it does, you might know, I don't, clearly I've forgotten, but I do remember the theory.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I thinking, wow, I bet a lot of mothers, when they're given the option, I bet they don't know this. There's a lot of talk about whether or not breastfeeding or feeding formula is good for the immune system, and they make choices based on that, but I bet that there's a lot less people that are actually aware of any repercussions of choosing the way of birth for the child, not just for the mother.
I think you're totally right on that. And I think we've got a culture that's about convenience now. And so people are like, oh, I'm having a baby on the 6th of August at 7 o'clock. And because they just book in their cesareans. But you're right. The muscular experience that the baby has, along with, there's a lot of different bacteria through the vaginal canal that the baby is exposed to. And with its first breaths, it breathes a lot of that in and it populates its microbiome. And it's the same with breast milk as well, is that facilitates the fauna and flora of the gut. And so if we're not putting in biological molecules that match the environment that we came from, aka we lived in our mum, right? So if the food's coming from our mum, it's already built for us, whereas formula is artificial and synthetic. It's not to say that it doesn't do the job, but it's definitely second best.
Yeah, wow.
So,
I had a question.
I know that I'm a man, by the way, so no judgment on any mums out there for their choices.
Yeah, they're all firing up at the moment. This dude telling us about breastfeeding. Hey, obviously you settled on, because or what I see as your main, I could be wrong, but your main thing is really nutrition now. So obviously out of everything you dived into, would you see that as the number one thing that is influencing our health?
No, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things that are competing for that top spot, but I think that I landed there because when I started being in the cancer hospital, I literally one day I just got to the point where I did a walk of the hospital. It took about 2 hours. I went to every single ward and bed that I had access to. and I just tallied up whether people were overweight or not. And basically it was like 80% of people were chronically overweight that I was able to see. And the data reflects this as well. That's already published. And so I needed to see it for myself, and it was true. And even in the waiting rooms, it's really, really obvious. And so I was like, okay, so if overweight people get cancer or get diabetes or get Alzheimer's or get insert disease, then one step closer to the cause is, okay, they're overweight, or they're obese. And then I was like, what causes that? One step back, getting closer to the cause, is obviously the nutrition or the food that they're putting in their body. Now, that's where I saw where the most change could happen, because I thought, this is like the cancer that you develop happens at home in your life, right? Then you come to a hospital and then you're given a treatment and then you go back into the world that created the disease. And so if we're not changing the home environment, whether that be the food, the toxins, the mold, the stressful relationship we're in that causes cortisol and adrenaline problems, all of these types of things, if we're not changing that environment, of course, like 90% of cancer patients that get, their cancer removed get relapse because they haven't changed the environment where that happened. And the way that one of the big pillars of that is we're all going to eat pretty much every single day. And so if we can start changing that bit, we're less likely to become obese and then less likely to get any type of disease, basically.
Yeah. Oh, so many questions. Oh, Matty, far out. What I want to ask, and this is a bit of an odd one, and I've never really thought about it like this before. I want to ask you the importance over, because you just talked about obesity, and I know, funnily enough, when I was jumping on this this podcast with you, I thought that I would go straight into talking about fasting and intermittent fasting, and I will touch on that definitely, but it's kind of taken a bit of a backseat. But I know that, because you said before about, I know that longevity, so food restriction has a direct correlation with longevity. So when we start to restrict our eating, we can tend to affect our longevity positively. So what I wanted to ask was, and not that one's more important than the other, obviously quality of what we eat is extremely important. But if the quality of what we eat is on point, does then the quantity of that still have negative effects, and to what degree?
That's a good question. So the reason that first up, like, I want to go up the ladder so that it makes sense for everybody. So basically, why do we eat, right? So we eat because the body needs fuel to run, it needs energy to run. But what are the motivating factors in the first world where we've got access to food all the time and nobody's really starving, nobody's really chronically malnutritioned? So the two reasons are that our psychology, so we've got emotional eating, which is one of the biggest problems. So the next step back from nutrition is actually your habits and your psychology, right? So that's one of the biggest things. And then the second is a lack of satiation. And satiation means being full after you eat. So we don't get satiated when there's a lack of protein in the meal and there's a lack of nutrition in the meal. So, you think you go to an event, maybe it's a party, you eat all this food and you just feel gross, you're absolutely stuffed, but you still get home and swing on the pantry door and you're like, I just could go one more maybe.
You've been following me around.
That's a totally normal thing, and that's because the modern diet and the modern options are energy dense. Like they take up a physical amount of space in our gut, and there's so much energy packed into them, but they're nutrient dense. So we're still seeking this protein input or this nutrient input. So to go back to your question, if we're putting in whole real foods, which are nutrient dense, and including a sufficient amount of protein, because protein is essentially what runs and maintains our cells. The carbs and fats sort of burn the energy for the metabolism and to do things, but the protein is the body, and our cells are proliferating, separating, and rebuilding and repairing every day. So we need protein in every single meal. So the amount that we put in can reduce only if the nutrient density goes up.
It's funny because as a always fairly fortunately lean human, I studied epigenetics last year with PH360. I don't know if you've heard of them, but so I'm what they call the activator, high in testosterone and adrenaline. So I'm a little feeding machine, and that means that I get good muscular development and I don't tend to put on weight as easily as some other types. But often, especially when I was boxing, say when I first got into boxing, and I had, I was I still had a really reasonably great diet, even when I was fairly uneducated about it, because I did have a bit of an interest in knowing what food was doing. So I think I always live by that 80-20 rule. So I don't want to sound like a complete nuff, but that 20% was like I had an addiction with chocolate. I would eat a family block of old gold chocolate. If it was in front of me, I'd eat it. And sometimes I'd eat bloody 2 blocks. And it was funny because people were like, well, you're skinny, so it doesn't matter. Like, you can eat anything. And I used to always say, yeah, but it's not the case. Like, my energy levels, I'll end up with bloody diabetes. Like, the repercussions are much greater than, it's kind of a disservice that it doesn't have a physiological or a composition effect on me, because it's allowing me to get away with it day to day. But I know in my mind that my performance is dropping, my behavior is changing, my behaviors, it's God knows what that sugar's doing in my system, Matty, and I'm sure you will tell me exactly what it's doing. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, you're totally onto it there. And there's been marathon runners that have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes just because they're in the fortunate group that don't pack on body fat, but you're still degrading your brain, and you are what you eat. As corny as it sounds, the cells that are in your body are built from the food and the fuel that you put in. So if you put crap in, you build crap. Like, and most of the body's cells are replaced over, days, weeks, months, or years. Like our bones take about 7 years to replace. They're about the longest cell in the body that takes, to proliferate and grow new ones. Because obviously we don't want them changing every day, or we'd all be jellyfish, right?
Yes.
So what you put in builds. If you don't pack the fat, you could be building a brain that's full of inflammation and full of crap that you've eaten, or organs, or dysregulating your hormonal responses. And this has catastrophic effects for people that are aging, but also for young people. Like, I'm just young. But if you're at an age where you want to have babies, you're like what you're eating during your pregnancy, and this is the same for men. Men should be equally as prepared to conceive a child, because your genetics contribute, right? 50%. So whatever the genetics you have switched on and in full swing when you conceive a baby, like a lot of blokes think this is just a pump and dump exercise, right? I've got no involvement otherwise, and if there's a miscarriage or something serious, it's her fault, right? It's her body.
Oh yeah.
Right? But it's 50-50, because you can get really weak survival genes from a super unhealthy male, right? So if you're building your body up, and during the pregnancy, the baby is built not from your diet, from the mother's body. It takes from the bones, it takes from the muscles. And so we need to be nutritionally abundant, irrelevant of what age, right?
That is the first time in my entire life anyone has ever framed that. And I think for a lot of the women that will hear this, God, what a perspective to hear. Because they do, because obviously you're carrying the child, and when you have a miscarriage, I've had people in this podcast that have had fertility issues and, had to go down adoption and surrogacy paths, and, the emotional burden they carry.
Totally. Yeah. It's such a heavy situation to be in. And on a more, not that any individual is to blame, but on a broader scale, that's, it's the beginning of de-evolution. The modern diet is creating, like, infertility was once like not even a thing, because humans were eating the most pure nutrition and food, and actually they used to regulate the tribe size by making sure that men and women didn't sleep together after they conceived a baby, and this was a big thing in African cultures, so that we don't get too many people that we can't look after. And I don't think you can find a society on Earth that's got people that are losing their shit left, right, and center because there's too many of them, right?
Yeah, wow. Hey, tell me about when you mentioned protein, and protein is such an important thing. I'm sure my listeners are wondering, so obviously going to real foods is obviously the priority, but tell me about protein in terms of protein supplementation, shakes, should they, shouldn't they, how much protein should they be having? Is there a time of day they should be having it? Do they have the same amount every day?
This is a good question. I've been asked this question a lot about protein powders. I think the go-to in any nutritional or food situation should be the real thing. And then supplementation should just be on top to fill the gap. Because for the most part, you can't replace the quality nutrition that comes with the protein in a piece of kangaroo or in a organic piece of chicken or anything like that. So I think supplementation should be secondary. Now, sort of in the nutrition space, I think there's a lot of data to suggest that dairy is quite inflammatory. And the reason I bring that up is because most protein supplementation on the market is a derivative of milk. So it's casein. It's a casein-based protein. And most people actually lose the enzyme to break down milk before they're even adults. 70% of the world's adults are unable to metabolize dairy and lactose, right?
Wow.
So when it comes to protein powders, I always steer people towards options that are non-dairy. So we're talking hemp, we're talking pea, that type of thing. But that's after I've made sure that they're totally loaded on kangaroo, wallaby, crocodile, all of these types of naturally hunted sort of options, because wild is also even better than you can buy at a supermarket. So yeah, I think supplementation is an option, but if you're getting up and just smashing a protein shake without some real protein for your gut to digest, then you switch it around.
Yeah, awesome. Did I cut you off from answering that quality versus quantity question in its entirety? I can't remember. I get so excited.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. So quality versus quantity, we're in a situation where people are saying, have a multivitamin because celery no longer has what it used to 100 years ago. And a lot of supplements are synthetic, like medicine are synthetic versions of what nature is intended to do. So my argument is, well, if there's not as much in one apple, have two. Not that we should be eating an abundance of fruit, but that's why I like naturally hunted food as well, because when it comes to meat and protein sources, is because the best source of meat and protein you can get is something that lived its natural life. So it's usually a fit animal. Its diet was diverse in the way that it needs to be for that animal. So their immune system and their microbiome is diverse. And then you get that, right? Whereas when we go to the supermarket, go down to Woolies, get the cheapest beef steak off the shelf, it's probably got hormonal dysregulation. The beast hasn't actually seen the sun in many cases, so it's got poor vitamin D and all of the problems that come with a lack of vitamin D. It's got antivirals in it. It's got all sorts of vaccines in it, and we get at the end of its life, and it's lived that horrible, stressful cortisol life. We then ingest it. So I think, wild caught meat, where possible, is definitely the sort of supreme option when it comes to quality.
You just, far out. I'm getting my wild caught beef now. You made any other options sound quite unappealing then. Talk.
Grass-fed's good. Anything grass-fed and organic. You got to watch out for the classifications too.
Yeah, I am a bit of a meat snob when it comes to steak, so I do go to the butchers and get good steak, and only because I'm a snob, not so much. But now I know that I'm making a really solid choice with that.
I love that.
Tell me about some of the best practice, or how we fast, why we fast, who should fast, who shouldn't fast, and what are the fasting options?
All the things fasting. All right, cool.
Yes.
So, intermittent fasting's been a big thing on the gram lately of the last few years, and all over the place. But I guess the first thing with intermittent fasting is just to clear up for people that you're actually always doing intermittent fasting. It's not like a new fad. It is from a marketing perspective, but humans have intermittent fasted every day for all of human history, because it's just the cycle between the time that I don't eat and the time that I do eat. The idea of an intermittent fasting protocol or schedule, though, is when you control that a little more. So it's like, for 16 hours of the day, I'm not going to do it. For 8 hours of the day, or not going to eat. For 8 hours of the day, I'm going to eat. And it's not particularly about calorie restriction either. It's just about allowing your body a window of time, essentially, to recover and have a break. The latest research out of the US shows that people are eating about 6 to 11 times a day. And so if you think about that, and you do that every day for your entire life, there's no wonder there's so many gut issues and diseases when you have never given your gut a break, right? You've never given it a day to heal and recover. And so the idea of intermittent fasting, a lot of people obviously use it for weight loss, and many of the people I work with, we use it in that context. But I think there's far more benefit from just giving your body some recovery time on a daily basis.
Yeah. So what are your recommendations for people? Firstly, who should not intermittent fast and why?
Good. That's a good question. So anyone that's orthorexic, anorexic, bulimic, or pregnant. So the first three are because they're eating disorders, and that's some serious psychological stuff that you need to deal with a psych. And then obviously there's just not enough data with pregnant women, and we want pregnant women to be as nutritionally abundant as possible. They're like, as much as, you know, cravings drive a lot of that process, high quality food really needs to be going into pregnant women as much as possible. Outside of that, virtually anyone can do it as long as you're doing it in the right way. You're not restricting yourself of any particular nutrient group that, you know, your body needs to function. I think the most important thing is that removing the diet culture is the important aspect, right? Is because a lot of people are like, all right, I've been looking this particular diet up, and whatever diet it is, on Monday, I'm just going to go 16 hours a day fasting for the first time ever. And they try it and they're like, oh, this is horrible. I had headaches, which are usually sugar and carb withdrawals in the brain. And there's all of these sort of behavioral responses that are like, oh, I'm forcing myself. So I think we first and foremost need to remove the concept of diet and restriction and deprivation out of the psychology of it. And with any diet, it should be one tweak a week. So if you sort of monitor yourself, if you want to do intermittent fasting, and you check out where you're at normally, right? So get up, check, oh yeah, I had breakfast at 8 o'clock, and then check in the afternoon or the evening when you finished your last bit of food. It's like 8 p.m. and be like, okay, so when I start on Monday or whichever day, I'm just going to move it 1 hour, right? We would just want to just one tweak a week, because we don't want to from a behavior standpoint, we don't want to freak out. We don't want our metabolism to freak out, because that yo-yo dieting is why a lot of people, and particularly women, you know, in their middle age, and they're like, I've just gained, every time I've tried to diet, I came off losing a few kilos, and the kilos just came back on plus more. So you don't want to perpetuate that cycle. So yeah, most people can do it as long as it's done properly and supported. It's progressively, you know, approached so that, yeah, there's nobody's bodies are freaking out. But it's different for everyone. So some people can skip breakfast. But if you're working out and you're particularly interested about, you know, your body composition, if it's like, so for me, for example, I get up and do a workout. So in the hour post workout, I make sure that I get my protein in. So that means for me, I choose that by the end of the day, you know, I kind of skip dinner essentially. But everyone's life's different. There's about 50 plus different intermittent fasting protocols that can be used for disease states, for weight loss, for just general longevity and health. So there's an array of options on the menu.
I've definitely played with it from time to time and different versions of it. Talk to me about women, and because I know there's a lot of literature out there on female hormones. Should they fast for less time? Should they watch their cycle and do anything specific to their own cycle?
Good question. So I think, yeah, women need to be much more safe and progressive. So if you're going to try it for the first time in sort of, say, next week, you might just pick 2 days to try, but still you're one tweak a week, right? So that you're just slow, because there's a saying that the longer the adaptation, the better the stability, right? So you can't adapt to something overnight. So if you make it slow and progressive, your body will start to really feel stable in that space, and your genetics will start adapting to it. And so I think for women, we need to support the hormones as well. There's a lot of data out there that says, you know, carbs are actually super important for building women's hormones and their estrogen management and things like that. And so whilst a low carb diet or even a keto diet can be really, really beneficial, and the idea of intermittent fasting is that we actually dip our toes into a ketogenic state a couple of times a week or each day, that for women, carbs are actually really, really beneficial. And a lot of people that are overweight are likely to have some kind of hormonal dysregulation. So they want to support that. And that's one of the things that you don't hear on Instagram from the keto crowd, is the amount of amenorrhea that happens in that group, which is loss of your period, because you're not building any of the enzymes or precursors or the hormonal framework that supports that healthy process of normal menstruation, right? So women need to be really smooth about it, and it comes back to quality as well. So when we are eating, like, we want to make sure that we're feeling good, we're putting good food in, we're feeling full and satiated. So at no point do we want to feel like we're depriving ourselves. You know you're doing it wrong if by the end of your fast, you're like, I'm hungry and I'm forcing myself not to eat. You're getting things wrong. You're either not working on your mindset and your habits, or your microbiome hasn't been set up appropriately for you to reprogram all of the physical food cravings that your gut bacteria have.
Yeah, wow. Before I ask the next question, I'm getting a little bit of crackling. Can you just, I don't know if that's your mic, just have a little bit of a wiggle of the shit. Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Are we back?
Yes, that's awesome. It wasn't too bad, but I was like, I'll get rid of it if I can.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. What about as women are peri and going through menopause? So perimenopausal. Fuck, am I even saying that right? God, come on, Tiff, you're a female. I'm nearly there myself, mate. Yeah, that thing. When women are there, and as they go through menopause, I get a multitude of my listeners, anytime I touch on master's age athletes or menopause or any of those topics, they're reaching out, they're putting on weight, the weight's not moving the way it used to. What can you tell me about that process?
So there's a really interesting process which most people don't know about. So when you get to that menopause stage and you start gaining weight, it's not because, you know, you're secretly unconsciously in your sleep eating donuts, right? It's because your hormonal system is starting to shut down, but your body still your other parts of your body still need those hormones in order to function. So the fat cells produce those hormones. That's why we gain the body fat, right? So it's actually a good sign that your body knows what to do in order to outsource the production of those hormones. So that's why that actual process happens. So a lot of people just think, oh, you know, it just happens, and, you know, it's because I can't regulate what I eat, and they beat themselves up. And it's your genetics doing what your body's designed to do in that situation.
Is there anything that they can do to counteract that in a healthy way?
That's a good question. So by the time we get to that age, it really depends on your history of diet culture and things like that. And then it fundamentally comes back to the same principle, is that, you know, start changing over the nutrition that you put in your body, start reducing the sugar, start reducing the vegetable oils. That's a really big one that sort of gets forgotten about, is that the vegetable oils that we cook with are catastrophic to the human body and the brain and your arteries, and probably the major contributor to atherosclerosis and heart disease. And many diseases. But vegetable oils, so, you know, we're talking your canola oils, your peanut oils, these types of things. We want to kind of steer clear of those. They do a lot of damage in our cooking and our fast food and things like that. So it's the same general advice, because as long as the right food is going in, and that we're fasting, you know, a healthy amount each day, and that will look different for everybody, the body will regulate itself into the right pattern. Right. So, but it depends what we're doing on the other side of that equation. And it's not just nutrition, stress. And by the time we get to perimenopause and menopause, we've probably been stressed about a fair amount of stuff in our life. Right. So the problem with stress is that when we have that fight or flight cortisol response, is our body doesn't know the difference between running away from a car that's chasing us down on the road, and we actually need to physically, you know, run from the problem. It doesn't know the difference between that or sitting at your desk getting an email from your boss or your kids pissing you off. And so metabolically, what happens in the body is you have that stress, and it just releases all of this glycogen stores, so sugar, into the bloodstream for you to use that energy to run away, so you don't get run over or get chased by a rhinoceros or whatever it is. But if you're just sitting down, if you've just released all of that sugar into the bloodstream and you're not doing a physical activity to burn the sugar, then it just goes back into storage, and it's usually going to be in your stomach, or for women, on their bum, right? Because we're stressed out, and we're putting it out there, and then it just goes out of the muscle stores and out of the liver stores and goes straight onto our belly and onto our bum. So stress is such a major factor for weight loss. And so to counteract that, first we need to go on the long journey of learning how to actually manage our emotions and separate ourselves from the event and our triggers. And then we want to move into a space of coming down from that using breathing exercises, hypnosis, meditation. So stress is part of the program that I work with people. It's like nutrition and the way that we manage our body in a stressful situation are the two core pillars of weight loss, really.
I love that. That is awesome. When you talked earlier about the fasting and not getting to a point where you're holding out for that last hour and you're stressed. Now, with my experience, and I found the most challenging thing for me was my schedule day to day is very different. So sometimes I was taking morning classes and sometimes I was taking evening classes. So my preference would be to have either really late breakfast or lunch, and then be able to eat before bed so that I'm not going to bed hungry, and I'm not very good at being hangry. Now, in the beginning of me doing that, I'd always start with a shorter window and extend it out. But I know that my hunger hormones, I was saying to somebody on another podcast recently, without thinking, I can not be hungry, look at the clock, see that it's 12 o'clock, and within 5 minutes, I have real live hunger going on. I'm like, it's lunchtime. I just saw it, but 5 minutes before I've gone, oh, it's lunchtime. I'm not hungry. So talk me through that. How do people navigate that? Because I think that, well, from my experience, there was this time for that hunger to settle. And then once I got into a fasting schedule, then that hunger wasn't an intense, erratic hunger that I used to have when I got up and ate straight away for no reason.
I think it's basically anyone can relate to a situation in their life, and there's often one in the morning for most of us where we do a routine, and it might be just going to put a coffee on. You might even not want a coffee, or even go into the office and you smell that coffee, and it's just part of what you've learned in the morning as part of a normal routine, and it's familiar. And therefore, if we go into an evolutionary level, familiar means safe. So. We've got to first go through. Sorry,
I'm getting a lot of crackling again. Do you want to just? I don't know if it's your headphones or it's only when you talk.
That's really weird.
Yeah, it's a little bit worse before.
Maybe it's the lead. Is it happening now?
I think it's all right now. Give it a go.
I might need to swap leads.
Shouldn't be too bad. I'll just do a disclaimer at the start and go, Matt's audio was shit, but his content was great.
Where do you want me to go from?
Fuck, I don't even know. What were you saying? God.
Oh, we're talking about hunger.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so a lot of people have in the morning some type of learned process which makes them familiar with, getting up and starting their day and their day going normally. And this is often on a subconscious level. We're not really aware of this because we're half asleep. And it's the same with hunger. So we have learned hunger. And a lot of that has been conditioned from when we were younger. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If you don't eat everything on your plate, the kids in Africa will die. These ridiculous statements that make no sense, but they condition us to behave in a certain way, whether it be, oh, I've got to get up because breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which it probably is for a 5-year-old that needs to grow, right? But when you're 25 or 20 or 35 or 50, you don't really need to grow much more. So you need less food going in, right? So So we've got all these situations that are learned hunger, and just like the clock, 12 o'clock, you trigger, a memory which is attached to a bunch of hormones and signals that go off in your brain, and they trigger that release of ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, because you've learned that at that time of the day, or when you smell that thing, or when you do that particular activity, it's time to eat. So, and that's just conditioning. And you can progressively, same with the 1 tweak a week thing, is you progressively sort of condition yourself out of that. But it takes time.
Yeah, I love that. Oh God, so many more questions, but I'm gonna have to wrap it up because you haven't got all day. But if you're open to it at some point, I'm probably going to reach out again and get you back on because this has been really
Absolutely.
ace. But
I'd love that.
as we wrap it up, I'd love to hear what you would, and obviously this would change for everybody. God,
Hmm.
there were so many things I wrote down. I feel like crying that I can't ask you now. But tell me your three top pieces of nutritional advice and why.
Three top pieces. Okay, number one, liver is the most nutritional thing on the planet that you can put in your body.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's the most nutritional thing you can put in your body, basically. So, yeah. So if anybody's nutritionally deficient or has growing children or has a situation with their body where they're trying to recover from anything, putting liver into your diet. It doesn't taste nice, so it's good in curries. It's good in things with lots of spices. Another good hack to the system is if you use a lot of ground beef or beef mince, you can just make it like 10 or 20%, liver or heart or organ meat, offal meat. You don't even know it's there, but you're getting the nutritional benefit. So number one thing would be that. And if you really can't do it, you can get it in capsules. You can supplement it. So there's that option as well. So that would be number one. Number two is that no matter how well you eat, if you don't deal with your stress, your body's still not going to do what you want it to do. Number three. All right, what's number three? Number three would probably be hydration. So a lot of people don't realize that a lot of their ills and ails and aches and pains are from decades of not getting enough water intake. The data shows that Australians get about 1.1 to 1.5 litres on average, and the recommendation on average is 2.5 litres a day. So, for instance, to make sense of it, is that your spinal fluid is one of the last places in the body that gets topped up with water, and so a lot of people that have back problems or disc problems or things like that is because the water hasn't really arrived there for like 25 years. So hydration is not just about not feeling thirsty. It's about making sure that it gets to all the cells in your body and everywhere that it needs to go. So I think they're the three tips that would help a lot of people make a lot of change without having to pay a cent.
That is awesome. You really, that liver one really threw the spanner in for me. I've written that down. Yeah, thank you so much, Matty. That's awesome. How can my listeners find you and get more of your wisdom? How can they work with you? Where can they search for you?
Yeah, thanks, Tiff. So, How to Not Get Sick and Die is the podcast, so you can find me on whatever podcast app you're listening to this podcast. Other than that, Instagram, just at Matty Lansdown, same for all the social platforms, really. And I work with people in a group coaching setting and also a one-on-one setting, doing weight loss and really just helping people become their healthiest self. And so I've got a Facebook group which you can jump into, and that's free, and that's where you can start inquiring about the services that I offer.
Amazing. I'll have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been an awesome conversation.